In the last rebadge video, we covered 5 different cars that are rebadged Hondas. Well, there's some more of them that we didn't get to in that video, so today let's take a look at 5 more cars that are secretly Hondas. Well, some of them not so secret, let's be honest. First up, let's talk about the Proton Perdana. Now this is one I had never heard of until someone in the last video commented and suggested I cover it. If you've never heard of Proton, they're a Malaysian auto manufacturer founded in the early 1980s to be Malaysia's national automotive company, which was an initiative approved by Malaysia's then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. The company was initially fully owned by the Malaysian government, but a joint venture production deal in 1983 resulted in a minority stake of the company being held by Mitsubishi. As you might expect, many of Proton's early vehicles were either rebadges or built on Mitsubishi platforms. In fact, the first generation Proton Perdana was essentially a badge-engineered 7th generation Mitsubishi Galant, but for the sake of this video, we're going to be looking at the 2nd generation Perdana, which was actually a rebadged Honda. Now while the first generation was sold from 1995 all the way up until 2010, the Perdana went on hiatus for a couple years until 2012 when Proton entered a collaboration deal with Honda. And as a result, the 2nd generation Perdana finally went on sale in late 2013 as a 2014 model. And it was basically a rebadged 8th generation North American Honda Accord. But notice I said 8th generation. By 2013, the 9th generation Accord was in production. So the Proton Perdana was actually based on the previous generation that was no longer in production. I don't know if this was actually part of the deal or not, but it meant that this rebadge didn't cause any marketing conflicts with its sister car, the Accord, which was also sold in Malaysia. From the outside, it's pretty easily recognizable as an Accord, but the front end does have a different bumper and grille. And I have to say that Proton logo is pretty cool. The trunk lid has some added chrome trim that we didn't get in our version, but the Perdana was intended to be an upscale executive car for Malaysia. In fact, it was the official government vehicle. And for the first phase of the vehicle's launch, the Perdana was exclusively sold to the government. During the first 2 model years, over 3,000 of them were delivered to government officials and civil servants to replace all of their aging first generation Perdanas. In fact, there was even a long wheelbase version of the Perdana produced so that the real high-up officials could be chauffeured around in something luxurious. Yes, 8th gen Honda Accord limos are a real thing. The interior is mostly just 8th gen Accord. I think they were all leather though. Again, this was an executive car. But check this out, they all had rear climate vents. You don't see that in the Accords. You had to get an Acura for such luxuries in America. I was only able to find a few low quality pictures of long wheelbase interiors. Now some of them just had pretty standard Accord rear seats, just with more room to stretch out, but others, like this one, I guess the ones that were going to the real high up VIPs, had a totally unique rear seat with red leather, a partition wall, this crazy console thing. And interestingly, if you look at the front seat of one of these, they have a rotary dial transmission selector, which is definitely not out of any Honda. I'm not sure if they put that in to make it more upscale feeling, like a Jaguar or something. And there's also what looks to be a switch for an electric parking brake, which is interesting. Accords of this generation don't have electric parking brakes. So I'm wondering if instead of sourcing a longer cable, did they just install electric parking brake calipers on the back? The Perdana didn't go on sale to the general public until 2016, at which time it received a pretty significant update, but we'll get to that in a minute. Under the hood, there were 2 engine options for the Proton, but unlike North American Accords, where the choices were either a K-Series 4-cylinder or a J-Series V6, there were 2 different 4-cylinder options. The base model, known as the Proton Perdana 2.0, had an R-Series 2-liter, the R20A3, which was also used in some other international market Accords, and then the higher end version of the car, the Perdana 2.4, which used the same K-Series 4-cylinder found in North American Accords. The Perdana would go on sale to the general Malaysian public in 2016, but not before it received a rather significant revision. The lights are new, the trunk lid is new, the grille is new, the wheels are new. I have to say this refresh makes the Perdana look much more modern, much more upscale, and much more unique, and just all around much better. And yes, there still was a long wheelbase limousine version for government use. If I didn't already know this was a dressed up Accord, I might not even recognize it at a glance. Unless I glanced inside, that is, because the interior didn't get so drastically updated. In fact, the only change I can see is an added touchscreen interface audio system. This is an Android-powered system built by Proton, so not something you'll find in any Accords. On Perdana 2.4 models, this interface also had a touchscreen navigation system, one that, at least judging by pictures, appears to be far superior to the clunky optional navigation that American Accords got. In a review of the 2016 Proton Perdana I found, the reviewer states that navigating the menus in this new system is a pain-free and lag-free experience. Really? Well, that's something that can definitely not be said about most Honda infotainment systems. Honda should make another deal with Proton and try this system out. A few other Perdana perks over the Accord were front and rear parking sensors, the rear climate vents I already mentioned, wood grain trim around the rear cup holders, HID projection headlamps with LED running lights and LED taillights, and the Perdana name elegantly embossed into your leather seats to ensure all passengers remember that they are indeed riding in a Perdana, not just some Accord. The Proton Perdana would continue to be sold in Malaysia up until 2020 when it was discontinued. I gotta admit guys, I'd never heard of this car before, but I'm pretty impressed. Yeah, the first 2 model years is a pretty straightforward rebadge, but after that 2016 update, it's a pretty nice car. I think it's way better looking than an Accord. I'd even take one over a new Accord, but that's not saying much. The biggest downside is that they're automatic only, and of course there's no V6 option, but still. So who else wants to import a Perdana when they're old enough and roll on up to a Honda meet in one? Oh wait, what if I pulled up to a Honda meet in a long wheelbase Perdana? Greetings commoners, it is I, Acura Advice. Who? Like the YouTuber? Yeah bro, we've never heard of you. Right. Anyway, that's the Perdana. Let me know what you guys think of it. Now, while Proton may not be afraid to put their own flair on their rebadge endeavors, this next brand certainly is. That's right. It's once again time to talk about the rebadge kings themselves, Isuzu. So in the last video we covered both the Isuzu Gemini and the Isuzu Aska, but there's a couple more Isuzu models that are Honda rebadges that we didn't talk about, so we're going to cover those ones today, starting with the Isuzu Oasis. The Oasis was one of the vehicles given to Isuzu to sell as part of the deal that saw Honda rebadge both the Isuzu Rodeo and the Isuzu Trooper to make them into Honda and Acura's first 2 SUV models, the Passport and the SLX respectively. Now the Oasis was a rebadged first generation Odyssey. No, the first generation. Remember the one without the sliding door? Yeah, that one. If you forgot about it, I don't blame you, it's been years since I've seen one in the wild. It barely qualifies as a minivan, really, it's kind of just a station wagon with a third row of seating. But dang if these things weren't practical and roomy. The third row seats could actually fold flat into the floor, allowing you to haul all sorts of cargo. You could also fold the second and third row seats back like this, allowing you to sleep in the Odyssey, or do other activities. All of this, and the Odyssey was powered by Honda's bulletproof F22B, a variant of the non-VTEC 2.2 liter found in 5th generation Accords. So what are the differences between the Oasis and the Odyssey? Well, there's the logo and the grille's a little different. And the trim levels are S and LS for the Oasis instead of LX and EX for the it's a rebadge in every sense of the word. In fact, out of all the Isuzu models I've covered, this one might be like the most straightforward rebadge, where they literally changed nothing.
Brought to you by Isuzu.
Now in 1998, the Oasis and the Odyssey's powertrain was updated to the new 6th generation Accord platform, giving them both the 2.3 liter engine. And this time they got the VTEC version, bumping up power to 150 horsepower. And it was definitely a needed increase over the previous engine, which admittedly was pretty underpowered for a van. And perhaps now that I'm thinking about it, one of the reasons these vehicles didn't sell very well, as most buyers in this segment were probably looking at V6s. By the way, I found a mistake on Honda's media site. Look at this picture they have for the 1998 Odyssey interior. This is a Civic. Also, this engine they show for the 98 is not the 98 engine. This is the 95 to 97 2.2 liter. This is the 98 engine. So apparently Honda doesn't remember these things either. 1998 would be the final model year for the first generation Odyssey, meaning there's only one model year where the Odyssey has the 2.3 liter. The Oasis, however, would be sold for 1 extra year, making the 2.3 liter present in 2 model years of the Oasis. The Oasis is also unique over all of the other Isuzu rebadged Honda models in that it was actually sold in North America, whereas all of the other ones were not. So you could technically find an Oasis here. Technically. But despite being used as taxicabs in New York throughout the 90s, they sold less than 3,000 of them per year. And like I said earlier, it's been years since I've even seen an Odyssey of this generation in the wild. I don't know if I've ever actually seen an Oasis. So when was the last time you saw one? Another rebadged Honda Isuzu model was the Vertex. The Vertex went on sale for the 1996 model year in Thailand, and it's a rebadged version of the Japanese market Honda Integra SJ. Now the Honda Integra SJ, you might be saying, doesn't really look like much of an Integra. In fact, you might say it looks like a 6th gen Civic sedan with a bit of a different front end, and that's essentially what it is. The SJ stood for Sedan Joyful, and it was intended to be kind of a fancier Civic sedan positioned above the Civic Vario. I guess that's why they used the Integra nameplate, but that's also kind of what the Honda Domani was. So I mean, I don't know. How many versions of the damn Civic does Japan need? Now while the Integra SJ was powered by one of two variants of Honda's D15B engine, the Isuzu Vertex was powered by D16 engines. The Vertex also had two engine options, one of them being a non-VTEC D16 making 120 horsepower, and the other one being a VTEC version making 127 horsepower. Now there's nothing online anywhere in English that says which exact D series the Vertex used. But according to this Thai article that I Google translated, it uses the same engines as the Thai market Civic. Now Wikipedia has no listing for the Vertex, but it does list the VTI trim Thai market Civic as using the D16Y8, which means it's the same engine that our American Civic EX uses. And the horsepower, torque, and displacement numbers that I can see in these Isuzu Vertex brochures do line up with the D16Y8 specs, so I think that's correct. Now it also says that the lower trims use a non-VTEC D16 rated at 120 horsepower, so that would be different than our base model Civic engine. And I had a harder time finding a listing that matched those specs from the Vertex brochure. It could be the D16Y4, or it also might be some other variant that's not listed. Anyway, I just spent like 2 hours of my life trying to figure out what exact D-series engine the Vertex uses by cross-referencing numbers from an article in a language I can't understand with all of the specs of the D-series engines on Wikipedia. What I'm saying is I think I just figured out why I'm single. The Isuzu Vertex initially had 6 different trim levels, 4 of them with the VTEC engine and 2 of them with ABS. Now as you may have noticed, Isuzu marketing of the Vertex featured the face of Richard Gere. Why? Well, it wasn't uncommon at the time for American celebrities to be featured in Asian market vehicle advertisements.
So what do you do?
I sell Isuzus.
Wow.
I guess they figured if they slapped some rich American's face on the brochure, it would make the car seem more upscale, despite it really being a rebadge of a rebadge. You can also see in some shots the Isuzu Vertex casually hanging out in a palace. You guys can live in a palace too if you buy a Vertex. Taking a look at the styling, and let's be real here, we're really talking about the Integra SJ styling, because in typical Isuzu fashion, all they did was slap their name on the steering wheel and grille and say, good to go, put it in the showrooms.
Brought to you by Isuzu.
Anyway, the Integra SJ/Vertex rear end is just the same as a Civic sedan, but with white turn signal lenses, and the front end is taken straight off of a Honda Orthia. The interior is also full-on 6th gen Civic, although they did feature a digital clock, which Civics did not. I told you this was an upscale vehicle. Okay, hold on. What the hell is going on with this steering wheel and these brochure pictures? I get that the one on the right is showing off that it's a tilt steering wheel, but what exactly is this middle picture showing? I mean, it just looks like it's showing that the steering wheel can turn. I would have thought that was just implied. Otherwise, chilling on a palace mezzanine is about all this car would be able to do.
Brought to you by Isuzu.
A mid-model update occurred for 1998, and the Integra SJ and the Vertex got the same taillights update that the Civic sedans got. I also found out that they reduced the number of trim levels from 6 to 4 around 1997 because some of them weren't selling. I actually got the impression from what I did understand from this article that the Vertex did not sell very well because customers couldn't see the difference between the Civic and the more expensive Vertex. So apparently, Isuzu, it turns out you do need more than just Richard Gere's face and a plethora of chandeliers to sell rebadged Civics in Thailand. Ain't nobody was falling for it.
No.
As part of the 1998 refresh, they slashed the trim levels down to just 2 and eliminated the VTEC engine option altogether. Hold on a minute. Are those parking sensors? I take it all back. The Vertex is luxurious. You can't get parking sensors on an American Civic to this day. After a few more years of dwindling sales, the last Isuzu Vertex models were sold in 2001, coinciding with the last year of the Integra SJ. So who wants to import a Vertex? Well, come on, it's got a clock, parking sensors, power folding mirrors. Looks great on a mezzanine.
Honda Quintet 新登場。走りよし、燃費よし、機能性よし。 この1台にホンダの先進性の全てを込めた。
In the early 1980s, Honda added a new Civic variant to their domestic market lineup. Remember that in 1980, in Japan, you had your basic Civic, you had the more upscale sedan version sold as the Honda Ballade, and now a 5-door liftback version sold as the Honda Quint. The Quint was also intended to be a more upscale model, with top trim levels coming equipped with power windows, locks, air conditioning, and a power sunroof. And just look at that luxurious interior. It even had wood grain trim. The Honda Quint was also sold in European and Southeast Asian markets as the Honda Quintet, although I think they should have saved that name for their 5-cylinder. Now, if you watched the last rebadge video, you know that around this time, Honda had entered a joint venture deal with British Leyland, and we covered both the Triumph Acclaim and the Rover 800 series in that video. But there were some other Hondas that... Oh, hang on a second, guys. Someone's at my door. Hello?
That's not funny!
But there were some other Hondas that got Rover badges for certain markets as well, and one of them was the Honda Quint. This was actually the first Rover badged Honda, and it was sent down under to Australia where it was sold at Jaguar Rover dealers as the Rover Quintet starting in 1983.
Brought to you by Isuzu.
No, we're done with Isuzu for this video. In typical rebadge fashion, not much was changed before Rover slapped their badge on it, but it does actually have different taillights from most Honda badged Quintets. They're wraparound lights and they look a little better and more modern, I think. The original Quint lights look like they belong on a Datsun B210. Now, I did find a few pictures of Honda badged Quintets with the wraparound taillights too, so it seems they maybe just used those lights in certain markets. There are also some markets that had sealed beam headlights for the earlier model years. Now, you might think that the vehicle would require some more upscaling before it could be sold as a Rover, but remember it was the early 1980s, and the Quintet already had a full complement of power options, a tinted glass sunroof, plush seating, fully independent suspension, power steering, air conditioning, and a wood grain dash accent. You even got a tack and 16 different idiot lights. How much more fancy could you get? Besides, the Quintet's reliability was a breath of fresh air for both consumers and Jaguar Rover Australia employees alike. The engine for the Quintet was an E-Series family 12-valve carbureted 1.6 liter rated at about 94 horsepower. Transmissions were a 5-speed manual or an optional 3-speed Honda-matic. Being such a small and nimble car, the Quintet got great fuel economy yet was enjoyable to drive, reliable, and practical. The Quintet was only sold in Australia for 3 years before it was replaced in 1986 by the car we're going to talk about next, but it was pretty well received in the Australian market, at least from what I read. If any Australians are watching, let me know in the comments if there's any of them still around, and what do you think of them? You all probably know that for the 1986 model year, Honda released their first ever Integra. Of course, in North America, this vehicle would be Acura badge and sold as one of Acura's first 2 launch models. Now, Japan had many variations on the Integra, with one of them being the Honda Integra Quint, a 5-door liftback that replaced the previous Honda Quint. Quite a stark contrast to the previous Quint though, being a larger wedge-shaped car with pop-up headlights. These were also shipped down to Australia, where Jaguar Rover Australia used them to replace the Rover Quintet. But this time they changed the name to the Rover 416i because of branding, I would assume. This name was more on brand with all the other needlessly confusing and forgettable numbers British Leyland uses to name their cars. I'm guessing they were branding it as a 400 series and it's a 1.6 liter, so 416. I don't know what the I stands for. Maybe someone in the comments can tell us. Now, while not all variants of the Integra outside of the Acura branded one used the 1.6 liter dual overhead cam motor, the Rover 416i did. Oh, I wonder if the I stands for fuel injected, actually. Anyways, it was a slightly different variant from the brown top D16A1 that North American Integras had in 86 and 87. It was the D16A3, which had a higher 9.5:1 compression ratio and slightly higher horsepower and torque numbers than the brown top engine. The US market would have to wait for the updated black top version of the engine in 1988 to achieve similar specs, although they were still slightly different engines from one another. Stylistically, again, Rover didn't really do anything to the Integra except for throw their badge on it, which I have to say kind of suits the front end, doesn't it? The Integra is already such a good looking car, what more did you need to change? But unlike Acura branded models, mirrors, door handles, and bumpers were not body colored. In 1987, Rover introduced a higher end trim to the 416i called the 416i Vitesse. Oh, I better check or people are gonna get mad in the comments.
Vitesse.
Oh man, I can't say that. Anyways, this new higher end trim added body colored bumpers, a spoiler, 14-inch alloy wheels, and locally sourced wood grain trim for the interior. I think they only put it on the doors though. Can't get too carried away. Wood grain doesn't grow on trees, you know. Unless they used real wood, in which case I guess it does.
That's not funny!
Honestly though, it looks like somebody just cut out wood grain strips and glued it onto the doors. Like, Rover definitely added that. It's not even flush like the door panels were built to have it incorporated. It's sort of just slapped over top. Look at how thick it is. But this was the prestigious trim level, and it was being sold at the same dealerships as Jaguars, so it simply had to have it. In 1988, the Rover 416i received the same facelift as Integra's, which gave it clear turn signal lenses that wrapped around the bumper slightly, as well as a new gauge cluster, new steering wheel, and an updated climate control and digital clock layout. The Rover badged Integra would be sold until 1989, which was the last year of production for the first generation Integra. Well, that'll do it for now. Hope you enjoyed today's video talking about another 5 rebadged Hondas.
Brought to you by Isuzu.
Well, I mean some of them were, but alright, we're done here.
Oh, don't shut the lid, it's actually... Nope, you shut the lid.